All right, let's jump right into this. Welcome to today's Explainer, where we're going to reverse engineer a truly chilling true crime investigation that unfolded in the usually quiet community of Warner Robins, Georgia. We're going to take a really close look at how what seemed like an open and shut tragedy completely unraveled into something so much darker. By walking through the physical evidence, the digital footprints, and the timelines, we'll see exactly how investigators managed to corner a predator who honestly thought he was smarter than everyone else in the room. Let's get started. So set the scene. It's the morning of November 24th, 2023, literally the day after Thanksgiving. The 911 operator picks up a call from 57-year-old Brian McManus. He tells them, quote, "I've just come back from walking the dog, and I found my wife dead. It looks like an obvious self-inflicted gunshot wound." But what immediately set off alarm bells for both the operators and the first responding officers was his tone. It was just eerily calm, mechanical, precise. He's reporting the sudden, tragic death of his 63-year-old wife, Lucille Ann McManus, and yet there's absolutely zero shock, no grief, just a complete lack of emotional distress. And it gets worse. When detectives Carmen Thompson and Elizabeth Smith actually showed up at the house on Wake Forest Drive, the physical reality of the crime scene completely blew Brian's story out of the water. Miss Ann wasn't found with a gunshot wound. She had massive blunt force trauma. There was blood on the walls and ceiling, pointing to a really prolonged, savage attack. Plus, there was no gun, no shell casings, no gunpowder residue anywhere in the house. And while Brian is just standing there, apparently only worried about whether he's a suspect, officers notice these fresh, unexplained scratch marks all over his arms. Scratches that he suddenly claimed he hadn't noticed and just couldn't explain. So you gotta ask yourself, how on earth does an incredibly obvious, brutal murder get reported as a suicide? The scene practically screamed violence, yet the caller is doubling down on a story that makes absolutely zero sense based on the physical evidence right in front of them. Well, to understand this bizarre and horrific morning, we actually have to hit rewind. We need to go back to the previous year, 2022, to figure out exactly how this whole nightmare started. Section 1. The Target and the Trap. Before we really dig into the perpetrator, we have to understand the victim and how her absolute best qualities were literally weaponized against her. Everyone in the neighborhood knew her as Ms. Ann. She was a 63-year-old widow who ran this bustling, multi-generational home with her granddaughter Jessica and her 2 great-grandchildren. Ms. Ann she was that person. She remembered your birthday, she waved from her garden, she genuinely believed people were fundamentally good. But despite having this huge, full life as a family matriarch, she was lonely. She wasn't looking for some grand, sweeping romance. She really just wanted a companion, someone to have morning coffee with. So, like millions of other people, she joined Tinder in 2022, just hoping for a connection. Now, there is an incredible, stark contrast between the man she thought she met and who he actually was. The Tinder persona that popped up on Miss Ann's screen, Brian pitched himself as this 55-year-old distinguished British gentleman, a man of honor, 17 years with the London Metropolitan Police, just looking to build a new life in America. But the reality was a whole different story. Brian had actually been fired from the Metropolitan Police after multiple women filed sexual harassment complaints against him. He also had a previous marriage out in Idaho that ended in divorce right after an arrest for domestic violence. This guy had a well-established pattern of using and discarding women, and his real motive here, he just wanted a green card. 3. That is the number of months it took for Brian to propose to Miss Ann after they first met online. I mean, the speed is just blindingly suspicious. He charmed her, totally infiltrated her life, and swiftly locked down his path to permanent residency in the U.S. He moved right into her family home, and to Miss Ann, it honestly just felt like a fairy tale. Which brings us to Section 2, the double life and the fatal mistake. So once the paperwork goes through and his green card seems secure, the whole charming British gentleman act completely vanishes. His true, calculating nature starts creeping out. District Attorney Eric Edwards would later call Brian a serial liar and a textbook narcissist. This is a guy who genuinely believed he was the smartest man in any room he walked into, and he treated women like disposable objects. To keep up his facade, Brian started taking these random, unexplained business trips down to Florida. He'd kiss Miss Ann goodbye, vanish for a few days, and then come back and play the devoted husband. But, surprise, he wasn't doing business in Florida. He was visiting his mistress, a woman who, by the way, was also married. He was juggling these massive, overlapping lies, totally unbothered by the absolute devastation it could cause. And this is a perfect example of how the most elaborate houses of cards usually fall apart because of one tiny, careless slip. In November 2023, Brian made an incredibly arrogant mistake. He accidentally sent this intimate, affectionate text message that was meant for his Florida mistress directly to Miss Anne. It is such a chilling reminder of how fast our digital footprints can turn on us. Think about that. Less than 150 characters of text instantly blew up his entire double life. But Miss Anne, she was absolutely not going to take this sitting down. She fought back. She confronted Brian in a massively heated exchange about the betrayal. And then she dropped an ultimatum that tragically sealed her fate. She told him she was going to report their marriage to immigration as a sham. For Brian, this was the ultimate disaster. It meant his green card would be revoked, and he'd be immediately deported back to the UK, where his reputation was already ruined. In Brian's completely cold, calculating mind, Miss Anne went from being a convenient stepping stone to a roadblock. And to a guy like him, roadblocks just needed to be eliminated. Section 3. The 25 minutes that exposed a killer. Let's pull this right back to the morning of November 24th. This is where modern investigative work is just incredible, because neighborhood security cameras caught Brian's every move. Let's look at the timeline. At 8:45 a.m., cameras pick up Brian leaving the house for his usual dog walk. But instead of sticking to his route, at 8:50 a.m., he takes a detour to a drainage ditch and is actually seen dumping items into the water. By 9 a.m., he's walking back home, and at 9:10 a.m., he makes that eerily calm 911 call claiming it was a suicide. He honestly thought he had crafted the perfect alibi, but the cameras locked in on the exact 25-minute window where he was desperately trying to erase a murder. And the physical evidence? It just entirely dismantled every single thing he claimed. Brian says it was suicide by gun. Well, in that drainage ditch, police pull out a bloody rubber mallet and a smashed cell phone. The GBI autopsy then confirms Miss Anne was actually bludgeoned with that exact mallet and then manually strangled. Brian claims he has no idea how he got those deep scratches on his arms, but the autopsy proves Miss Anne fought desperately for her life, and Brian's DNA was found right there, packed under her fingernails. The physical evidence left absolutely no room for doubt.
Section 4. Dismantling the alibis.
So as all this physical and digital evidence starts stacking up, Brian realizes he's cornered, right? And he starts acting super erratic. He frantically tries to pivot his story, but investigators were ready, and they systematically shredded his lies one by one. First, Brian cruelly tries to throw suspicion on Miss Anne's grieving granddaughter, Jessica, and her boyfriend, but FBI cell data instantly proves they were miles away when the murder happened. Okay, so then Brian pivots to a home invasion gone wrong theory, but police sweep the house and find zero signs of forced entry. And finally, that neighborhood camera footage conclusively proves that nobody else entered or left the property that entire morning. It was just Brian and Miss Anne in that house. Period.
Section 5. Justice for Miss Anne.
With his alibis completely destroyed and a mountain of evidence against him, the trial was basically a rapid-fire conclusion. On July 7, 2025, Brian McManus stood trial for malice murder. Over 6 days, prosecutors walked the jury through the DNA, the camera footage, and his totally horrifying history of exploiting women. And true to form, Brian sat there showing absolutely zero emotion the entire time. The case was so ironclad that on July 16th, it took the jury just 2 hours to come back with a guilty verdict. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. I think Judge Edward D. Lukemeyer really hit the nail on the head during sentencing when he looked at Brian and said, "You basically bashed in the skull of another human being." It just perfectly underscores the horrific, up-close brutality of a man who literally viewed human life as a disposable asset to get a green card. And her family? They were absolutely shattered. Her granddaughter Jessica talked about this immense sorrow and guilt, calling Brian a selfish, cold-blooded monster who violently stole their kind, beautiful matriarch away from them. But you know, it's so important that we don't just focus on the terrible actions of a predator. Lucille Miss Anne McManus truly deserves to be remembered for the beautiful life she lived. Her legacy is one of love, having an open heart, incredible generosity, and this deeply unwavering belief in human goodness. Now, did those traits make her vulnerable? Yes, they did, but they're also the exact reasons why she was so incredibly beloved by her family, her neighborhood, and literally everyone whose life she touched. Which leaves us with this final, really pressing thought. This whole case highlights a deeply unsettling vulnerability in our modern world. As older adults are increasingly turning to dating apps and social media, just looking for simple companionship, they can so easily become targets. So how can we, as families and communities, actually step up and better protect our trusting loved ones from these predators hiding behind a screen? It's a conversation that every single family needs to be having right now. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and I really hope this deep dive helps us all stay just a little bit more vigilant out there.